The sea stretched in all directions, endless and indifferent, its steel-gray surface roiled by the slow churn of the storm not yet arrived. The HMS Bridger, a hulking warship unlike any other in the fleet, moved through the chop with a deliberate, almost stubborn momentum. Her blackened sails and soot-stained funnels marked her as a relic. Too slow to lead, too valuable to lose, and yet never quite fitting anywhere. Commander Elias Warwick stood at the bridge, his gloved hands resting against the rust-worn railing. Tall and spare, with lines etched deep from salt and disappointment, Warwick had commanded faster vessels in his youth. Sleek cruisers, nimble destroyers. But the Bridger was his now, officially reassigned, unofficially exiled. He knew the whispers that followed his name across the Admiralty, a career stalling with the same lethargy as the ship he now captained. The Bridger was not always scorned. At her launch, the Royal Navy heralded her as an innovation in armor and endurance. Her triple-reinforced hull and broadside cannons were designed to withstand a siege. But what the architects gained in defense, they lost in propulsion. The ship's hybrid design, part steam engine, part sail, never achieved the intended harmony. Even at full power, she lagged behind formations, struggling to keep pace with supply ships. By the time the fleet encountered modern warfare's demands for speed and agility, the Bridger was obsolete. Still, no one wanted to scrap her. Too expensive, too unique, too damn difficult to categorize. And so she was repurposed again and again, first as a training platform, then a floating command center, finally relegated to coastal patrols, so mind-numbing even her officers forgot why they had joined the Navy in the first place. Elias felt the weight of those decisions pressing against him like the gray clouds overhead. He had requested a command after a disastrous incident in the Pacific, one he never discussed. His friends in high places, reluctant to court scandal, found him this, a ship no one wanted under a man few remembered. Below deck, Lieutenant Mara Voss stared at the engine core with the same frustration she always carried. She was young, brilliant, and utterly wasted on this antique. Her talents in ship mechanics had been the stuff of Academy lore, rumors of mind that could outdesign the engineers who built the fleet. But she had clashed with the wrong admiral, refused the wrong order. Now she was here, keeping this half-dead iron Leviathan afloat with spit and ingenuity. Mara wiped oil from her hands and sighed, staring at the archaic steam pistons that coughed and hissed like an asthmatic beast. "We're burning more fuel than we should," she muttered. Again, a voice beside her answered dryly, "Because the Bridger is always hungry, like her captain." Chief Petty Officer Harland, old enough to remember the ship's launch, leaned against the bulkhead. "And you, Lieutenant, are feeding her genius when she only ever needed rations." "She needs an overhaul," Mara snapped. "Or mercy." "She'll get neither," Harland replied. "Not while she's still floating." On the surface, little of this tension showed. The crew carried out their tasks with practiced dullness, the kind of routine that made a warship feel like a ghost ship. Most had asked for transfers within weeks of their assignment. Those who stayed did so because they had no place else to go. Misfits, scapegoats, and the forgotten. The Bridger took them all in, slow as judgment and just as heavy. Their mission was insultingly vague. Patrol the Northern Passage, discourage piracy, show the flag. Everyone knew it was busy work. The real fleet fought in the southern fronts, where the war had gone cold but never quiet. Rumors drifted through the crew like the ever-present mist, of enemy submarines slipping past defenses, of experimental ships vanishing mid-route of betrayals. But aboard the Bridger, none of that mattered. Theirs was a long road, the irrelevant watch, until the distress call. It came through the old radio systems in a garbled staccato. Merchant convoy struck. Coordinates follow. Enemy craft unknown need cover immediate. The voice was panicked. The line cut halfway through the message. Warwick heard it from the bridge and felt his pulse finally quicken. Not because of fear, but purpose. He ordered an immediate course adjustment. The helmsman hesitated. "Sir, we won't reach them in time. We're the slowest vessel in this quadrant." "I know what we are," Warwick said. "That doesn't change what we do." Below, Mara had already begun recalibrating the engine output, siphoning reserve power from the heating grid to propeller systems. She didn't wait for orders. She knew what Warwick would do. She also knew what the Bridger couldn't do. But still, she tried. The ship groaned under the strain, her rivets singing a metal song of protest as they churned through waters growing increasingly hostile. The weather worsened, as though the sky itself wanted to test their resolve. Thunder rumbled across the horizon. Waves swelled like giants. As night fell, the Bridger emerged into the combat zone, a lumbering silhouette bathed in lightning. Fires danced on the wrecks of merchant ships. Through binoculars, Warwick spotted fast-moving enemy vessels, unmarked, too sleek to be civilian. Mara's voice crackled over the intercom. "We've only got half power on the main guns. If you want precision, you'll have to give me time." "We don't have time," Warwick replied. Then something happened no one expected. The enemy vessels didn't attack. They circled the Bridger, hesitant, probing, as if unsure what to make of her. A trap? A decoy? Or simply too big to matter? That hesitation gave the Bridger an opening. Warwick ordered a broadside fire. One shot roared. It missed. The second didn't. It struck a smaller craft amidships, detonating its hull. The rest scattered. "They don't know what we are," Warwick said softly, watching the chaos unfold. "And that might be the only edge we have." The battle was brief, brutal, and confusing. The enemy ships disappeared into the mist as quickly as they'd come. The Bridger stood alone again, battered but alive, the convoy survivors clinging to hope. In the silence that followed, Mara leaned against a bulkhead, exhausted but strangely proud. Harlan offered her a flask. She refused. Above deck, Warwick watched the sunrise break through storm clouds, staining the ocean with gold. For the first time in years, the Bridger had moved with purpose. Not fast, not gracefully, but unyielding. He didn't smile, but he did whisper, almost himself, "Let them underestimate us." And deep within the ship, something old and slow stirred like it had remembered what was meant to be. The fog had not lifted since the engagement, and neither had the unease that clung to the crew like a second skin. Though the enemy had retreated, no one on the Bridger believed it was over. In fact, the ship's slow, resolute journey back to port carried an unfamiliar weight, one that creaked in the hull and whispered through the corridors. Below deck, the engine room was alive with the sound of tools, steam, and Mara Voss's terse commands. She hadn't slept properly in 2 days. Ever since the confrontation, her mind had been running diagnostic loops, trying to understand how the ship had survived, and more pressingly, how it had managed to fight back with systems barely stitched together by borrowed time. The Bridger had revealed something in that fight, a raw, buried potential masked by age and inertia. It hadn't been fast, it hadn't been elegant, but when cornered, it had hit like a leviathan awakened. And Mara, more than anyone, saw the hidden design in its flaws. Chief Harlan entered with a steaming mug and a skeptical eyebrow. "You planning to rewire the whole engine room before breakfast?" She glanced at him, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth. "No, maybe just enough to make her move like she means it." "Good luck," he muttered, handing her the drink. They're whispering upstairs. Something the Admiral's fleet might be paying attention now. After what happened, "Let them watch," Mara said. "Maybe it's time they remember what this ship is made of." Up on the bridge, Warwick studied the reports filtering in from naval intelligence. The skirmish with the unmarked vessels had stirred interest in high command. There were questions. Who were the attackers? Why were they targeting convoys? And most importantly, how had the Bridger held them off when better ships had vanished under similar circumstances? Orders followed in the usual convoluted fashion. The Bridger was to continue its patrol route, but now with a new designation, Vanguard Observation. A test, not an honor. High Command wanted to see if lightning could strike twice, or if the last victory had been dumb luck. And with that designation came something more rare than gold in the Navy, resources. For the first time in years, supply boats were redirected to the Bridger. Parts arrived, fuel, ammunition, and personnel transfers. Engineers, radar specialists, cryptographers. It was a trickle, not a flood, but it was enough to raise eyebrows and hopes alike. Mara threw herself into the upgrades with the fervor of someone who'd been dying to prove herself. She overhauled the targeting system, rerouted auxiliary power lines, and even reconfigured the lower deck ventilation to improve heat dispersal from the stubborn steam engines. Her innovations weren't just repairs, they were reinventions. Harlan watched her work with a mix of pride and dread. He'd seen too many miracles collapse under the weight of expectations. Meanwhile, Warwick met with a new radar technician, a wiry, nervous man named Cole who had a habit of tapping his fingers against his thigh like a Morse code machine. Cole had been plucked from a top-tier fleet, and his reassignment to the Bridger was clearly a punishment, though no one said why. "I don't belong here," Cole admitted during their first meeting. "No one does," Warwick replied. "That's why it works." They outfitted the ship with a newer, tighter communications array. Cole's adjustments to the radar swept further than any system the Bridger had carried before. On their next run, they saw not just the ocean around them, but the signals of approaching vessels, the heat bloom of engines, the tremor of hidden threats in the water. And the threats kept coming. Another convoy, another ambush. This time, the enemy attacked with more precision, no longer testing but attempting to crush. The Bridger, slow and alone again, did not run. Warwick anchored her into a defensive triangle with the convoy freighters. Her guns opened fire, not with desperation, but strategy. The crew had drilled endlessly since the last encounter. Mara's upgrades meant the turrets turned faster, reloaded cleaner. Cole's radar gave them seconds of warning they never used to have. And Warwick. He had studied the enemy's evasions, adapted. The Bridger held the line for 37 minutes before naval support arrived. It was enough. 2 enemy ships sunk, 1 captured, its crew taken in by Bridger's boarding team. That single act, boarding, was unthinkable for a ship once thought too slow to engage, let alone dominate. The intelligence they recovered unraveled a truth darker than expected. The attackers weren't pirates. They were part of a rogue fleet backed by a foreign syndicate with experimental technology and unclear motives. Their ships were fast, agile, but lightly armored. Perfect prey for a predator built like a fortress. And so, the narrative shifted again. The Bridger, once a joke among sailors, became something else. A black ship that did not yield, that did not chase because it did not need to. It waited like deep water. It struck when others fled. The slowest warship had become the most unshakable. But with reputation came risk. The Admiralty sent observers, men in sharp uniforms with clipped accents who measured every bulkhead and questioned every decision. They spoke to Mara, asked for diagrams, pressured her for theoretical improvements that bordered on weaponization. She gave them just enough to keep them intrigued, and nothing more. Warwick despised them. They reminded him of the court-martial hearings after the Pacific. They wore the same smiles. "Be careful," he told Mara after one debrief. "They're not interested in how you made the ship better. They're interested in what they can take without needing you." She nodded, though her eyes remained fixed on the console before her. Let them try. The Bridger doesn't work unless you understand her. One night, after another drill, Harlan found Warwick alone in the observation deck, staring out at the sea. "You're not sleeping," the old officer said. "Neither is the ocean," Warwick replied. Harlan stepped beside him, silent for a long time. "You think they'll send us into the center of it? The real war?" "They already have," Warwick said. "They just don't know it yet." Behind them, the ship hummed. Not loudly, not fast, but steady. Every rivet, every repaired wire, every bruised hand on every lever told a story. And the story wasn't over. The Bridger had become a problem the Navy didn't know how to categorize anymore. Too effective to be discarded. Too unpredictable to fully trust. She wasn't a tool. She was a variable. A weapon shaped by those who had no business commanding one. And the war was changing. Fast ships were disappearing in silent flashes. Communications were being jammed. Convoys rerouted without explanation. Something unseen stirred beneath the calm of strategy. As the fog thickened once more and the Bridger turned east toward her next patrol, there was a stillness in the water that felt like a breath being held. The crew, scarred and sharpening, didn't speak of destiny. They spoke of readiness, of defense, because they knew If the enemy ever came in force, it would not be the fastest ship that held the line. It would be the one that refused to move. The storm struck without warning, a wall of black squall that swallowed the horizon in seconds. The bridger heaved against the rising waves, her reinforced hull groaning with each punishing swell. Lightning carved ragged veins across the sky, illuminating the fractured sea and casting the ship in flickering, ghostly outlines. Orders flew across the bridge like bullets, shouted, repeated, obeyed with cold, trained precision. This was no ordinary storm. It had intent. Ward braced himself at the helm, rain needling his face like shrapnel, eyes locked on the dim pulse of radar screens that fluttered with static. Something was out there. He could feel it, not just weather, not coincidence. A trap. The enemy had learned, and now they were using the ocean itself as a weapon. Below deck, Mara was already in motion, slamming into bulkheads as she pushed toward the engine room. Her fingers closed around handrails slick with condensation, boots clanging across metal. Harlan's voice crackled over the intercom, terse and urgent. Power fluctuations in the secondary grid. I need diagnostics on line 3. Now! She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The storm wasn't a threat. It was a screen. Through the chaos, Cole huddled over the radar console, his fingers dancing with nervous speed. The storm interfered with everything. Signal noise, sonar scatter, visual contact. But there, buried in the interference, he saw it. Shadows, fast and low, gliding in tight arcs beneath the waves. Submarines. No signatures, no flags. Silent assassins. He hit the alarm just as the first torpedo slammed into the bridger's stern. The impact threw Mara against the bulkhead. Her shoulder cracked painfully. But she stayed upright, scrambling to the control panel as the lights flickered and a warning klaxon split the air. She shut it off with one sharp command, isolating the damage. Flooding but contained. The engine core was intact. Brace for a second strike. Warwick's voice roared over the internal comms. They're triangulating. But the second strike never came. Instead, sonar detected a detonation. Underwater, distant but distinct. One of the submarines had vanished off Cole's display, wiped out not by Bridger's weapons, but something else. A pressure collapse, maybe an accident or sabotage. Confusion reigned for half a moment, and then came a chilling realization. Not all the enemy ships were working together. Someone had fired on their own. Warwick pieced it together faster than anyone. The foreign syndicate wasn't unified. Its rogue elements, emboldened by experimental tech, had fractured. What had seemed like coordinated assaults were in fact a race for territory, for dominance, and the Bridger had become the proving ground. He called the officers into a dim-lit war room, where the ship's patched holographic projector struggled to keep the map steady. Mara arrived, arm bound with gauze. Cole stood near the rear, silent, trembling. Harlan paced. We're not just in the middle of a war. Warwick said quietly, we're in the middle of a schism. These factions are trying to outgun each other, and we're the bait. Mara stared at the projected movements. So what do we do? Wait for the next one to get lucky? No, Warwick said. We make them come to us. All of them. It was suicide on paper. A single warship, slow, aging, calling out to a fractured enemy to settle their score all at once. But the logic was brutal and sound. The Bridger had survived more than she ever should have. Her story had reached ears far beyond their fleet. Now, she would become the battlefield. One place, one fight. Let them come. They broadcast a signal on an open frequency. A challenge. Coordinates burn across every encrypted channel used by rogue factions. No threats, no diplomacy. Just a time and a place. Mara oversaw preparations with ruthless energy. Every system tested. Every shell counted. She walked the decks at night, speaking to the ship like it could hear her. The crew trained in silence, their eyes sharpened by the knowledge that no reinforcements would come. Warwick stood on the forward deck as dawn broke over a field of iron-colored waves. The sea was quiet, too quiet. Then, one by one, shadows emerged on the horizon. Ships, sleek, fast, dozens. They surrounded the Bridger, forming a loose perimeter. Each ship bore a different design. Pirate spines, stealth frames, patched hulls thick with stolen tech. But none fired. A transmission clicked through, low and modulated. "You're brave," the voice said. "Or stupid." "Both," Warwick replied. "Let's get this over with." What followed was not the bloodbath expected. Instead, a brief ceasefire. A council, if it could be called that, on neutral waters. Representatives from a fractured syndicate stepped aboard the bridger. Men and women who didn't shake hands, who looked over their shoulders at every moment. They met in the officers' mess under close watch. Warwick faced them with unflinching calm. "You've all been hunting us, testing your weapons, pushing to see what works. I'm offering you one final test. You face us, together, or not at all. And if we say no..." Mara entered then, placing a charred piece of hull armor on the table. "Then we keep taking you apart one ship at a time. We've gotten very good at that." It wasn't negotiation. It was bait, and one of them took it. A commander from the Breakwater Fleet, ambitious, brutal, accepted the challenge, confident in his numerical superiority. The others, hesitant but eager to see a rival fall, agreed to spectate. They would let the bridger be their proxy battlefield. If it fell, they would claim the wreckage. If it didn't, they would have to reconsider everything. The challenge was set. A mock engagement, one-on-one, broadcast to the others. A test of power, played on a deadly stage. The bridger met the breakwater ship Asda at high noon, beneath a sky so clear it seemed unnatural. The enemy vessel dwarfed the bridger in speed and firepower. It moved like a viper, all sharp turns and sudden bursts. But the bridger was patient. Warwick lured it into narrow channels carved by reef and current. Mara fed false readings through modified sonar to disrupt targeting. Harlan timed their salvos not to hit, but to push, to herd. Cole tracked every signal, every hesitation. And when Azdaha took the bait and overextended, the bridger struck, not from the front, but from below. Depth charges, perfectly placed, rattled the enemy's propulsion. In seconds, the sea turned red and smoke curled skyward. Cheers did not erupt, not from the bridger. They were too tired, too aware of how close it had been. But the rogue fleet saw, and in silence, some began to retreat. Others sent messages. Not all alliances are forged in trust. Some are forged in awe, in fear. The bridger had survived again, not because she was faster, not because she was newer, but because she was the one ship no one could predict. A paradox. Too slow to run, too stubborn to die. As darkness fell and the ocean resumed its slow breathing, Warwick stood again at the helm, watching the fractured horizon mend itself into calm. "They'll come back," Mara said quietly beside him. "I know," he said. "And next time they won't come alone." She looked up at the stars, her expression unreadable. "Good. Let's make it count." The ocean was still, the kind of stillness that came after something enormous had passed through, the kind that warned of calm before a deeper storm. The bridger moved slowly across the glassy surface, her engines a distant heartbeat, barely disturbing the water beneath. Every bolt and rivet bore the strain of what she had endured. Her crew had changed too, not in uniform, but in presence, quieter, steadier, shaped by the knowledge that they had done the impossible. It was only the beginning. Warwick stood on the command deck, one hand resting on the steel rail, the other clutching the after-action reports that had started to trickle in from the rogue fleets. Most had vanished again into their fractured networks. A few sent encrypted signals, silent nods of respect, or perhaps acknowledgement of power newly understood. None offered peace. The bridger hadn't earned peace. She had earned reputation, and reputation was its own kind of war. Harlan leaned beside him, gruff as always. "This ship's going to outlive us all." "No," Warwick said. "It's just going to make sure we don't die quietly." Below, in the heart of the ship, Mara traced her fingers along a fresh seam in the hull. The repairs were holding. The engines, still temperamental, thrummed with a deeper resonance now, less like machinery, more like breath. She had worked the metal like clay, shaping improvements no blueprint had ever authorized. No one gave her permission. No one needed to. She had become the mind of the bridger, as much as the engines were her voice. Cole had adjusted as well. He no longer flinched at every call. He walked straighter, eyes sharp with calculation instead of fear. He had developed new scanning protocols, ways to detect enemy ships through electromagnetic residue rather than movement. It worked, and it terrified him. "The more I see," he confessed to Mara one night, "the more I wonder what's still hiding from us." She had no answer, only a knowing silence. It wasn't long before the silence broke. An emergency ping cracked through their systems, coded, desperate, from a merchant convoy out of Pania Sector. Multiple ships lost, communications jammed, unknown enemy. Ward didn't hesitate. Orders were given, coordinates locked. As they approached the coordinates, a wreckage field unfolded across the waves. Twisted hulls bobbed like skeletal remains, the water stained with oil and metal. Not a single distress beacon remained active. The destruction had been clean, surgical. Cole's radar picked something up. At first, only a flicker, then a distortion, almost like a ripple in static. Then nothing. It was gone. Warwick narrowed his eyes. "They wanted us to see this." "Why?" Mara asked. "To send a message. Or bait a trap. Maybe both." The message came hours later, broadcast wideband with no encryption. A synthetic voice, faceless, genderless, cold. "You hold a legend together with tape and stubbornness. It's time someone reminded the world that legends end." Coordinates followed. An island, a dead zone, long abandoned by maps and memory. High Command, watching remotely, urged caution. Some even recommended turning back. But the bridger was not built to retreat, and her captain had already decided. They arrived at the island by nightfall. Rain pelted the decks, thick and relentless. The shoreline appeared through haze and fog. Dark cliffs, vegetation long reclaimed by wildness. No heat signatures. No movement. Coal systems picked up deep-sea vibrations, faint but growing. Harlan frowned. "What kind of weapons leave those kind of signatures?" "Nothing we've seen before," Mara said. Then the sea moved. Not a ship, a platform, a submerged carrier, larger than anything they had encountered. It rose from the depths like a monolith, all hard angles and humming cores. A construct of metal and arrogance. On its surface, weapon emplacements locked into place with fluid precision. The bridger turned broadside, her guns lifting in slow defiance. A voice echoed from the carrier, live this time, human, confident. "You become a symbol. That's the danger. Symbols inspire the weak." Ward didn't respond. He didn't need to. The first volley came without warning. Railgun slugs slicing the air like spears of thunder. The bridger shuddered under impact. Plates warping, alarms screaming. But she held. Mara rerouted power mid-hit. Cole counterjammed the targeting signals. Harlan directed emergency patches in real time. The bridger answered with shot her own. One Mara had built in secret. A torpedo retrofitted with stolen enemy tech. It flew crooked, as if uncertain of its purpose, then struck true at the carrier's starboard, punching through shielding no conventional weapon could touch. More followed. The sea erupted. For an hour, they traded blows, the bridger circling like a predator too old to chase but too wise to fall. Every strike she landed cost her, but it cost them more. The carrier faltered. Then came the final gambit. The enemy activated a failsafe, an implosion device buried in the seafloor, meant to drag everything around it into an artificial trench. A final insult. Mara saw it first. Her eyes widened. If it goes off, the trench will swallow half the coastline. "How much time?" Warwick asked. "For minutes, maybe less." There were no evacuation options. The bridger couldn't outrun the blast zone, but she could dive. Not deep, not far, but just enough. The idea hit Mara like lightning. If they rerouted core coolant to the ballast systems, vented steam through lateral thrusters, they could sink just beneath the blast, use the ocean's own mass as a shield. Warwick gave the order. The ship groaned in protest. Systems meant for surface battles twisted into something new. Pipes burst. Sparks flew. Crew braced along every deck. And the bridger slowest of all warships, sank like a dying Leviathan, willingly. The explosion above was muted. A dim roar. The sea boiled, then stilled. And for a moment, silence again. Then the ship rose, battered, scarred, but whole. The carrier was gone, ripped in half. The sea held nothing now but smoke and silence. The Bridger had survived her own grave. Warwick exhaled slowly. "She's not a legend," he said. "She's proof." Harlan looked around the ruined bridge, at the crew rising from their stations, bloody but standing. Proof of what? That if you build something strong enough, Mara said softly, and treat it right, it'll outlast everything that tried to kill it. The message spread quickly, even before they limped back to port. The footage, the signals, the broadcasts, no fleet could suppress them now. The story was no longer the Navy's to contain. The Bridger became more than a ship. She became a lesson, a reminder that force wasn't always found in speed or technology or firepower. Sometimes it was found in grit, in the worn steel and the people who refused to abandon it. A slow warship, the slowest, but the one that never stopped moving forward. And far beyond the seas they knew, other eyes were watching. War was not over, but now it had a new center. A ship once discarded, a crew once overlooked. The Bridger had become the storm,